And welcome into the Tuesday edition of Robby and Rexrode, 102.5, 106.3 The Game, brought to you by Chuck McDowell and Medical House Calls, Middle Tennessee's best medical care in the comfort and safety of your own home. For more information, go to medicalhousecalls.com. Medical House Calls, where the nearest clinic is your home. Robbie Stanley, Joe Rexrode, Nick Keyser here with you on this Tuesday morning. Hope everybody is doing well. Joe Rexrode, good morning. How are you?
Well, let's see. The Preds have gone hot and cold and hot. And the Titans have hired a new coach, and we're moving well into 2024. And I'm still doing this show from my mom's basement. So, I swear I'll come in one of these days. Tomorrow, man. I swear.
Rexrode's still trapped. Don't say it if you don't mean it.
No, I mean, I probably, the thing is, I look out there and it's like, I think I probably could have made it today. But we got some, goats and chickens roads here, man, that are like they are the last things to melt. So I don't know.
It's the thought.
How are you guys?
We're doing,
yeah, exactly.
We're doing well. Nick Keyser, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. What, Joe? At least you've had time to grow out your playoff beard. I guess that's something.
Well, yeah, it's my sick of my double chin goatee. Problem is, the connecting line on one side never comes in, and it's not happening. Maybe when I get to like 70, I'll be able to actually have a full adult's goatee. That'd be great.
Yeah, it'll be all white for you then by that point.
Oh wow, jeez, coming off top rope.
It's probably true.
That's okay.
If I'm alive, then yes,
you will be alive, Joe.
We got a whole lot to get to on the program
called
today.
Shot.
It appears, yes, called shot. Call your shot Tuesday. It appears that the Titans have found their next head football coach. According to multiple reports, the plan is to hire Brian Callahan, offensive coordinator from the Cincinnati Bengals. We have talked a lot over the past week and a half about Brian Callahan and his candidacy for this job. We'll have Caroline Fenton joining us at 7 o'clock and Paul Daner Jr. from The Athletic at 8 o'clock, who covers the Bengals, to get his perspective on the Brian Callahan hiring as well. So, Joe, nothing official yet as of, from the team or anything like that, but it looks like the plan is for Brian Callahan to be hired and that he will be the next head football coach for the Tennessee Titans. That coming out last night around, 6:15. We were blessed and graced last night, Joe, with the presence of John Glennon and Gentry Estes at the hockey game. And before warm-ups concluded, both of them were out the door. They were gone with the hiring of Brian Callahan being announced. Joe, your thoughts, your initial reaction to Callahan being the guy for the Tennessee Titans?
Yeah, and he's confirmed as hired.
Correct.
I think there's like HR stuff. I assume, and sometimes you got to cross some T's and dot some I's before you can make an announcement and go through all the HR stuff. So I would think that would come today. Will a presser happen today? I don't know. Today or probably tomorrow, one of the two. But look, I mean, I think what did I list as my top three? Was he my number one?
I believe that he was.
Yeah. So there you go. I guess I like it then, huh? No, I do like it. I think it's a good hire. Look, I mean, nothing is a guarantee hire, but as you look more into this guy, and we're, like you said, we're going to have Paul on. I mean, Paul knows him as well as anyone, and covered him all 5 years he was there with Cincinnati, and he's a huge believer in, him as an overall coach, person, all that stuff, but also as a real key to the Bengals' success. It's an interesting thing. Actually, there's a quote and thing that Paul wrote today that's, I think, really interesting from Zach Taylor about the whole play calling thing. But Zach Taylor is the play caller, and that is the one knock on Callahan is, calling the plays. Now, another thing, we don't know for sure. I think people assume Callahan is going to be the play calling head coach. He probably will be, but we don't know that for sure.
Sure.
But look, I think it's a good move. I think it makes sense. He's worked with a lot of good quarterbacks going back to when he was a young guy working with Peyton Manning. He got Peyton Manning's seal of approval. Matthew Stafford with the Lions. Derek Carr, and of course now Joe Burrow. He wasn't the QB coach. That's Brian Pitcher, who will probably elevate to OC there. But He's this is the way of the league. This is the way things are going. And I was trying to last night as I'm writing a column for the Athletic about this. I was like, okay, we really need to go through all the different offensive, hot shot hires, and all of them related to McVay and Shanahan have had at least pretty good success in recent years. Kingsbury would be a fail. Arthur Smith is a fail that just happened.
Yep.
Right. And then I threw in Josh McDaniels because he's still young, but it's just like he almost doesn't belong in that category. But I mean, that's technically right. I mean, he's an example of a guy whose offense was great when he had Tom Brady, and he keeps getting head coaching jobs and doesn't work out. But the Shanahan McVay guys and Callahan as an extension from Zach Taylor, they've been working out, and this team's about Will Levis. So to me, this is the right way to go. And I my big question was, are the Titans going to lose out to somebody else with him? So good on them for not letting him leave the building yesterday.
Well, I think the Titans deserve credit from this standpoint, and we'll see if it works out, if they've made the right move, and that's going to be something that time moving forward will determine. But it's pretty clear to me, Joe, based on the way that this has all gone down, that they identified Brian Callahan as the guy they wanted pretty quickly. And you piece together the interviews that took place. We talked about the David Shaw interview. At one point yesterday, Thomas Brown was scheduled to come in for a second interview. You had Dan Quinn apparently scheduled to come in for a second interview as well. And you thought, okay, well, that's interesting. What they about to go hire Dan Quinn? What's going on here with the Titans? But it's pretty clear, Brian Callahan, we talked about it last week. They had identified him, wanted him to come in as a second interview, and they started putting things in motion to get that to happen. And I credit the Titans for that. They identified exactly who they wanted, and they've gone out and they've gotten that done. Again, we'll see whether or not that's the right move, but there was at least some decisiveness that you can feel good about if you're a Titans fan there. Now, on the flip side, I had some people last night at the game talking about, like, well, why wouldn't you what's the harm in waiting for a Mike McDonald or for an Aaron Glenn, or why would Ben Johnson not talk to the Titans? All these other things, but it seems pretty clear that the Titans wanted Brian Callahan, and now they got him.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the sweet spot of, we've talked about offense versus defensive guy. Either of those guys might end up being great head coaches. Glenn McDonald, without question, but I prefer going the route of the offensive guy. I just think especially for where this team is now, especially with Levis going to his second year, you don't want him. You don't know what he's going to be. You don't know how good he's going to be. You want to find that out. Best way to find that out is to not have more upheaval.
Yeah.
So now look, Titans have a big turnaround next year. And everything looks good, and they fix the offensive line enough and all that stuff, and Levis flourishes, then whoever their OC is might get plucked away. But you have Callahan as the foundation. He's the guy who, again, he grew up in this league being a quarterback guy, and it's going to be his offense. So you're gonna have that for Levis, and that's what like Dan Campbell, great story with the Lions, has done a heck of a job. They're in the NFC title game. He's about to lose Ben Johnson, and then I don't know. Like I mean, Ben Johnson kind of created his own offense there with a combination of influences. And so he's just got to go hire a totally new OC. I mean, sometimes you have the elevation plan. That's what every team wants to get. Like the Bengals hope pitcher works out. He can step right in. But it doesn't always work out that way. So that's why I think this was better than a defensive coach. And then Ben Johnson, I mean, it seems like he just wasn't interested in the Titans.
It does.
So, okay. Hey, I mean, he's the hottest candidate out there. I mean, he's the guy who has been calling these plays, has completely flipped around an offense, and he's going to get paid ridiculous money by, the Commanders or the Panthers probably to be the head coach. So it happens. But you got this guy who, to me, was kind of a combination of maybe a little more realistic. But again, I also like him better, and that's the reason I said out front I liked him better than Ben Johnson, because this is the scheme that Will Levis knows. And I think that's a big deal. And then, of course, the OC hire here is going to be very interesting.
Well, just some background on Brian Callahan. So his NFL career gets started in 2010 in terms of the coaching part of it, with being an assistant with the Broncos, and like you said, that he was with the Broncos until 2015. So, Peyton Manning coming in there, the offensive assistant, and Peyton Manning has spoken glowingly about Brian Callahan in the past. Moved to being quarterbacks coach with the Detroit Lions for a couple of years, then quarterbacks coach with the Oakland Raiders. At the time, they were still the Oakland Raiders. And ever since then has been the Bengals offensive coordinator starting in 2019. So he got the offensive coordinator job at the age of 35. He's 39 now. He'll be 40 coming up, I believe, in June. So you're talking about still a relatively young guy, but a guy, Joe, that has been around the league for a pretty good length of time now, since 2010. And then obviously there's the connection with his father, Bill, as well, which we'll get to more on that here in just a few minutes. But a young guy, but a guy that's got pretty good experience in terms of his NFL career to this point.
Right. And that's the thing. Like when Zach Taylor was hired, we talk about it's always worked out, right? That was the height of, remember, that was the Super Bowl year. So the Rams made the Super Bowl. Jared Goff, really exciting. I think wasn't that the team? Was that the year that they, like, Kansas City and the Rams had like a 54-51 game?
I
think
believe it was. Yeah.
Mahomes and God, ridiculous. They make the Super Bowl, and Sean McVay, who of course got that job at 30, he couldn't have been. If you ever passed him in an elevator, you would at least get like a comms job in the NFL, right?
Yes.
And so Zach Taylor, 1 year as his QB coach, and he gets the Bengals job at 35. And I mean, a lot of people in the league are like, dude, what? Calm down, everybody. Well, been pretty freaking good. And Callahan, is a guy, a lot of people credit him, for getting Callahan from the Raiders and bringing him over to be his OC, and it's been a great partnership. So, and of course, like you said, I mean, Callahan, we'll talk about Bill Callahan, because I think that's a big issue we've been talking about that I think is about to be solved for the Titans too. In terms of Bill, Bill's one of the best offensive line coaches in football, college and pro, of the last 30 plus years. But Brian, so Brian has the living the life of football, obviously, with his dad, but his own personal experience, and it goes back to, Gary Kubiak was the Broncos coach. Gary Kubiak is a Mike Shanahan guy, so this goes back to the very roots of the new West Coast offense that Mike Shanahan gets credit for. So that's where Brian Callahan was rooted with Peyton Manning, for part of that time as well. So that's a pretty good pedigree.
So Brian Callahan set to become the 6th coach in the history of the Tennessee Titans. We'll take your thoughts on the hire. What do you make of that hire by the Titans? What do you make of Brian Callahan and his qualifications to be the next coach? More on that coming up next. You're listening to Robby and Rexrode, 102.5, 106.3 The Game. Welcome back in. Robby and Rexrode, 102.5, 106.3 The Game. Robbie Stanley, Joe Rexrode, Nick Keyser here with you on this Tuesday morning. The Titans set to hire Brian Callahan to be the 6th head coach in Titans history. I believe the 20th head coach overall in franchise history. Taking your thoughts on that. 615-737-1025, our phone number, 615-737-1025. Joe, we've gone through the background with Brian Callahan. We have a lot of people on the text line asking about Bill Callahan. So Bill Callahan, obviously, if you're a Titans fan going back from long enough, you'll remember Bill Callahan taking over for John Gruden as the head coach of the Oakland Raiders and beating the Titans in the AFC title game way back in 2002. And obviously he went on to the Super Bowl that year. They lost to John Gruden in Tampa and the Tampa Bay Bucks. So that's how far back Bill Callahan goes in terms of the head coaching part of it. He's been around the league for a long time. He's offensive line coach now in Cleveland. He is under contract, which is interesting about this, Joe. I do wonder with his son getting a head coaching job whether or not Cleveland kind of lets him go out of that contract. Sometimes you see things like that happen. But what do you make of the Bill Callahan part of this? And could that be the solution maybe to the Titans' offensive line in terms of the coaching part of it that they've been needing for a while here?
This is going to be the ultimate test of Titans Twitter because, you know, the last head coach, Mike Vrabel, hired different people he worked with and stuff. And so if anything goes bad, it's like, and Vrabel hiring his buddies. Yeah. Now it's going to be this kid hires his dad, and these guys gave up 5 sacks. I mean, it's going to be amazing. But, yeah, I think this is actually a situation where someone can hire a family member in a professional sports situation, and it's actually a hell of a hire, you know? Yeah. So I do think it'll happen. I don't think the Browns will. And there's been some reporting. Mary Kay Cabot, who covered the Browns forever, wrote a piece last night that makes it sound like I think the Browns will let him go, but it may be like sometimes situations like that. Like Chris Harris came here, right, from Washington, and it was like pass game coordinator, defensive side, or whatever the heck the title was. So maybe it's a souped up title along with O-line coach. Maybe, I mean, you know, I don't think it's a bad idea to have him as like assistant head coach. This guy's been a head coach in the NFL, like you said. He's been to the Super Bowl as a head coach. He's been a college head coach too. People in Nebraska back in 2003 were not happy to see that West Coast offense. They did not like that West Coast offense. But I think it totally makes sense. I'm trying to think of father-son combos in this league, in terms of like head coach and coordinator or head coach and position coach. I mean, obviously, like, I don't know, did Buddy Ryan's kids, either of them, work for him at any point?
I don't know. I can tell you the first thing I thought of when you started talking was Lane and Monty Kiffin at the University of Tennessee, where they would give up a big play. And this was like maybe in the very earliest days, but certainly I was not on it, of Vol Twitter. But I remember some of my friends just being like, that Lane Kiffin hiring his ancient father to be the defensive coordinator out there. Why can't he just go hire somebody normal? And that's the first thing I thought of when you started talking about Bill Callahan coming in as Titans offensive line coach.
That is a fantastic example. Yeah. You know, so it's like, so get ready. You know, if this offensive line isn't perfect, there's going to be people that are going to be pointing out that his dad is here. But yeah, I think he will be here. I think it'd be a great hire. Again, Bill Callahan, for all his resume, to me, you think about, he went with Barry Alvarez to Wisconsin in 1990. Wisconsin at that point was as bad a football. Wisconsin at that point was Vanderbilt right now. An absolute joke of a football program. Like, they went like 2-9 every year, and he set the foundation for dominant offensive line play. It's still their brand. Yeah. Like, they've been through all these different coaches since then, and it's still like what you think about when you think about Wisconsin is dominating offensive line play. They still send dudes to the pros left and right, and that's like, he started that. So I'm fascinated by that. I think that's so cool. But he's really good. I mean, look, he's really good with Cleveland. That's his wheelhouse, coaching offensive line. So if the Titans have that figured out, and taken care of. And certainly, here's another thing, sometimes people, look at someone's age. We just talked about how I'll look when I'm 70. It should be a real pretty sight. Bill Callahan is 67 years old.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody should have any concerns about him like playing out the string or whatever if he's trying to help his son be a successful head coach in the NFL, right? Yeah, I'm not saying there should have been any concern anyway, but I'm just saying that should be pushed aside as any kind of concern.
I would agree with that. Do you think Cleveland lets him go and lets him come here?
Yeah, I do. I mean, look, again, I think the Titans can kind of make it work, maybe with a different title. It's just hard for me to buy. Maybe if it was a division rival, it might be different. If it was an NFC team, it'd probably be even easier, right?
Yeah.
But I can't see Cleveland not letting him go. I suppose Jimmy Haslam, you never want to say never with anything with that guy, right? But I'd be
not going. You will remain here.
Exactly. You sit there and you like it. Joe Bettoni is your guy. I don't see it. I mean, I think anybody who's a reasonable person is going to let this happen. So I expect it to happen.
Let's go to our 1025 The Game phone line, driven by WilsonCountyHyundai.com. Welcome in Mark in Nashville. Mark, good morning, buddy. Thanks for calling in.
Hey, what's up, Robbie? Hey, Joe.
What's up, buddy?
Hey, y'all need to say your friend, your good friend, Mark. I kind of not
buddy.
hearing that. Yeah, okay. Yeah, you're
Best
right.
friend, Mark.
You're right. I'm sorry, Robbie.
BFF Mark on the line.
Hey, that's a good hire the Titans made. Offensive-minded guy, Callahan. Joe, he'll probably go get his friend from over at Kentucky, Liam, and bring him as his OC. There was talk Thomas Brown might have a connection to be that OC, but I think he's going to go with the guy from Kentucky. But I think that's a good hire. And yeah, they'll let his father come there. And he's a good offensive line coach, one of the top two in the NFL. But Joe, I got a riff with you this morning. You've been on the Lions all season, but Joe, Robbie, give Mark credit. Who said who was going to be in the NFC title game this year?
Did.
Who called it?
You did.
I called it, Joe.
Joe didn't want to listen.
I forgot.
No, Joe didn't want to listen, Joe.
Good call.
Oh, that's a good call, Joe. Give me credit, Joe. That's a good call. And Robbie, it ought to be your guys, the Green Bay Packers, in that game, too. They had that game. They played the 49ers. I believe Detroit's going to beat them Sunday, Joe. I believe it's going to be a rerun from the previous game this year when the Ravens and the Lions played in Baltimore. I think that's going to be the Super Bowl this year. So I'm going with that pick as my Super Bowl going to the Super Bowl this Sunday. So, Joe, you need to come on now. You're from Detroit, man. I was born up there, Joe, but for a hot minute. And two, Joe, when you get 70, man, just go get you some Botox or something. You'll be all right. You ain't going to look bad, man. You ain't going to look bad. You like you do
How do you know I'm not already? How do you know I'm not already? Come on.
Oh, Joe, you good, man. You good. Do like they do in Hollywood, Joe. Go find you somebody from Sweden or something and pay him and give him some Botox. You'll be good, Joe.
Mark, we love you, buddy. Thanks for the call.
Yeah. Hey, y'all have a good one, man.
You too, man.
All right, Mark.
Somebody from Sweden.
What's he trying to say? Some Sweden, yeah. Is that
what
what
do you make
Botox is?
Well, maybe so. What do you make of the Liam Cohen idea that he threw out there? It's a very popular idea over the last couple of weeks of Liam Cohen being the next OC for the Titans.
Yeah, I think there are two obvious candidates, and he's one of them. And, of course, I know Wildcat Twitter. What do we call Kentucky? Just Kentucky Twitter? Cat
Sure.
Twitter? What is it? Does it have a
Blue
name?
Twitter? I don't know.
Michelle Twitter. Well,
Could be that.
they're all up in arms because he was going to go to the Bears, and there's other teams that have been sniffing around Liam Cohen, and he had some quote like "I'm not leaving it" or whatever, and now it's like, oh great, so just go to the freaking Titans then. Yeah, I think it makes sense, but I don't think you have to do that. Obviously, I think that would be great for Will Levis. It's the same basic offense. You've got a guy. They obviously had a great relationship in 2021 at Kentucky. I mean, look, I've talked to Liam Cohen about Will Levis. I don't know if there's a bigger fan who's a coach who's a bigger fan of a player in the NFL. Like he's a all-out, full-on believer in Will Levis. But I think you make a good case for Thomas Brown too. As we've talked about with him, McVay guy. And so he's in that same tree. He interview with the Titans. My understanding is the interview was good, and this is what happened with Matt LaFleur when they hired Mike Vrabel. They interviewed him for head coach. They offered him the OC. He had a chance to come call plays, and he took it. That's an interesting thing. Again, LaFleur left McVay to come here to call plays.
Right.
Now, if you're Thomas Brown, is it appealing? It's certainly appealing to get the heck out of Carolina and get away from that mess. But how appealing is it to come here to be the OC but not be the play caller? It's an interesting point. But then again, here we go. Mike McDaniel and now Brian Callahan are guys who have gotten head coaching jobs without being play calling OCs.
More of your thoughts on the hiring of Brian Callahan coming up next. 615-737-1025 is our phone number. What does this mean for the path forward for the Titans with the philosophy, with the approach, maybe even some analytics, which were discussed yesterday after his hiring? We'll get into all that coming up next. You're listening to Robby and Rexrode, 102.5, 106.3, The Game. Hey, Robbie Stanley here, and if you've been watching the NFL playoffs from the sidelines, there's still time to get in the game with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. New customers bet this Sunday's conference championship games with $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. FanDuel has so many different ways for you to pick up a W. I've said it yesterday, and I'm going to stick with it this week. I like the Detroit Lions to go on the road in San Francisco and pull off the upset. I like Baltimore at home against Kansas City. But you can take it any way you want to take it. If you want to follow my picks, go to FanDuel right now. Get started with $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/Rob to join today. Once again, that's FanDuel.com/Rob. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Must be 21 or older and present in Tennessee. First online real money wager only. $10 first deposit required. Bonus issued is non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Got a gambling problem? Call the Tennessee Red Line at 1-800-889-9789. Welcome back in, Robby and Rexrode, 102.5, 106.3 The Game. We are broadcasting live from the Spring Hill Heating and Cooling Game Nashville studios, keeping your home feeling comfortable all year round. The Titans hiring Brian Callahan to be their next head coach, former offensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals. Taking your thoughts on that, 615-737-1025, our phone number, 615-737-1025. So, Joe, as you laid out, there's no guarantee, I guess, that Brian Callahan will be the one calling plays here in Nashville as head coach. Now, I think it makes sense for him to do that. I think that would be kind of a natural progression as the next step there. Quite frankly, I think that would be an attractive thing, and that's kind of the new way of doing things with some of these offensive coaches is they're the ones calling plays. And, it goes back to the offensive coordinator part of this too. If you lose your OC, at least you don't lose your play caller at that point. So we'll see if that actually happens, as most people expect it will with Brian Callahan. How much concern do you have, and how much concern do you think is fair that he has not called plays on a consistent basis to this point in his NFL career? And is that, look, we've seen examples of guys that haven't called plays that have stepped in, done a nice job whenever they get the opportunity to call plays. I brought up the Nathaniel Hackett example the other day, right, of he was the OC in Green Bay. Matt LaFleur was the play caller. Hackett gets the head coaching job in Denver, and he's calling plays for the first time, and needless to say, it did not go well. Now, that doesn't mean that Brian Callahan won't go well, but how much of a concern is it in your mind, if you're a Titans fan, that he has not called plays to this point?
Crap, I forgot to put Hackett in my comp. Gosh darn it, Robby.
Sorry.
And you even talked about it yesterday. It's my fault. No, it's my fault. Yeah, I think it's not nothing, okay? Because there is a certain art to it. There's just a certain, and I just think some people have. I think there's a certain in the moment. It's you plan and prepare for everything. You script a bunch of stuff. The scripting offense at the beginning of games. That's a Bill Walsh West Coast offense thing. That's the foundation of this offense. That's who started it. Is the whole scripting, the early stuff. But you can plan for everything and all that stuff. You can have all the counters in mind. You can break all your tendencies, and still, in the moment, some people just have a certain je ne sais quoi, okay, that some people don't have.
Nice.
But I'm going to read this quote. Thank you. I took 5 years of French. I'm gonna read this quote from Zach Taylor and Paul Dehner's really good comment. By the way, one thing he wrote about here is how weather messed everything up, and so he was actually going to drive to Nashville, but the Titans like, oh no, we'll send you a plane. Like, everything about this process said that from the start, Brian Callahan was their guy. And that's what everything tells us, about their actions. But here's a quote from Zach Taylor about play calling. Quote, "That's just people that don't actually know. He needs to call plays. Why? Nobody can say that. It's something people parrot out there. He's been the coordinator here for 5 years. He coordinates everything having to do with it. He establishes the whole structure of our offense. On game day, he and I are in constant communication. That is calling plays. That's establishing an offense. He knows everything I go through on a daily basis as a head coach. He and I both. He's as prepared as anybody can be prepared for it," end quote. So,
well, I don't doubt anything. I don't doubt any of that. There is a difference, though, between being involved in the process and actually being the one that has to come up with the play call. And I appreciate Zach Taylor in those comments, but there is a difference.
Sure. Yeah, no, I agree. But I think there are differences. So, for example, let's take Arthur Smith, who worked out well here.
Yep.
But Arthur Smith had been here through different, he'd been here through Malarkey and all that stuff, right? Different offense. And so he learns a new scheme. He's tight ends coach, and Vrabel liked him a lot. Obviously, in 1 year, I guess he became his buddy in 1 year. You're my buddy. I'm going to hire you, buddy. But 1 year as head coach or as tight ends coach, LaFleur leaves, and it's like, boom, call plays in this offense. Let's keep doing this offense. You've been in it 1 year, call plays, right? This is ownership of the offense. I agree with you. There's still a difference. There's still the in the moment play call. What's the right play call? Boom,
right.
Boom. What are they going to do? You got to be, cat and mouse with the other guy, But I think there is a difference with the total ownership of the offense, immersion, putting everything together for years, and like what you see a lot of times when people get elevated as a play caller. And sometimes you see people, again, Ben Johnson, was he like tight ends coach maybe with the Lions or something? He had never done any of this. They fire Anthony Lynn, or Dan Campbell takes play calling away from him in his first season. They stunk. I mean, who knows if he was the problem? They just stunk, right? But they give it to Ben Johnson, and all of a sudden he turns into a genius calling plays. And also, all of a sudden, their roster got really good. I mean, that's part of it too. But it's a fascinating topic. The whole thing about play calling and all that. As I think McDaniel is one of those situations where it was a question.
Yeah.
It's always going to be a question. But he's a good example of that guy seems pretty good. Designing offense, being creative, calling his own plays when he had an opportunity.
Well, one of the things, if I'm a Titans fan, that excites me, you listed the quarterbacks that he's worked with before, be it Peyton Manning or Matthew Stafford, Derek Carr, obviously Joe Burrow in Cincinnati. I also look at the coaches too, right? Like Jim Caldwell has worked with some good quarterbacks. He's worked with Jim Caldwell, John Gruden, Gary Kubiak, obviously Zach Taylor. I mean, there's Josh McDaniels in there too, so you can think of that what you will. But I mean, there's an extensive. I mean, John Fox. There's an extensive list of coaches that have been around the league for a long time and have been around the game for a long time that he's been in contact with. And part of what makes you or breaks you, Joe, as a new coach, as you know, is what kind of a staff can you assemble? Like, what's your coaching staff look like? How many people do you know? And we've talked about his father. That should be a big help in that area as well, but he's been around long enough where I would think, like his Rolodex and his ability to build a staff, that'd be one of the questions I'd be asking if I were the Titans. And based on his background, I feel like they should have an opportunity to put together a pretty good staff here under Brian Callahan.
No, I agree, and that's a huge part of it. Amy Adams Strunk said in her 5-minute video that it's a huge part of it. To the staff, I think that's one of the criticisms of Vrabel. I think that along with just obviously the losing and all the stuff that was going on behind the scenes, staff decisions and injuries, and there's another thing that we can talk about at some point today, but Brian Callahan's off season will be very different from Mike Vrabel's. Vrabel was a little bit more old school, although they try to do a lot of different things to give guys days off and try to manage this, right? I mean, they were trying a lot of things to manage the injuries and cut them down and give guys breaks. But the Bengals offseason has been basically well known as like the lightest in the league. So that's something to keep in mind. But as far as the staff, yeah, he's got connections. And of course, so does his dad,
Yep.
For sure. So this is where you would hope that would pay off. It's going to be very interesting. Does anybody with the Bengals now come with him in an elevated role? I mean, he's not going to like Dan Pitcher, I think, is the plan. He's not going to try to take him. He's the plan for Zach Taylor to be the OC there. But could anybody else come? If he gets his dad as O-line coach, and then to me, like either Thomas Brown or Liam Cohen as OC, I mean, that's a good start. It's a very good start. D coordinator, that's going to be really interesting.
Yep.
That's the thing. You still have to, have a D coordinator if you get an offensive head coach. And if you're good, you still have to potentially worry about losing them eventually. But that's still the better than the other way around to me.
Let's go back to our 102.5 The Game phone line, driven by WilsonCountyHyundai.com. Welcome in Jaden. Jaden, good morning. Thanks for calling in.
Good morning, guys. Hey, I just wanted to speak on the hire of Callahan. I like it. I like the offensive head coach. Listening to Jared's show yesterday, I think he encouraged everybody that we should not want a defensive head coach, and we didn't get one. Pretty happy with the hire. I think he's done a good job throughout his tenure in the NFL. I'm excited to see what he does here in Tennessee. But I have two questions for you guys, and number one is, do you think we could possibly see T. Higgins come to the Titans this offseason? And my second question is I don't know if y'all know, but will we hear from Callahan today or this week at all? Maybe in his introductory press conference. I'll hang up and listen. Have a good one, guys.
Yep. Thanks for the call, Jaden. On the second point, Joe, nothing's been announced yet, but I would imagine at some point this week there will be a press conference with Brian Callahan as the new head coach of the Tennessee Titans. So we'll see what happens on that front and when specifically that is. Could be today, could be tomorrow. We'll wait and see what happens on that front, but it's going to happen this week.
Yeah, probably today or tomorrow would be my guess.
The T. Higgins part of this is very interesting. We can get into that coming up next, but obviously pretty easy connection to draw from Brian Callahan and working with T. Higgins. to what that could mean if he becomes a free agent. We'll get into that coming up next as well. This is Robby and Rexrode, 102.5, 106.3, The Game. Welcome back in, Robby and Rexrode, 102.5, 106.3, The Game. I got some tickets to give away to see Stained with special guest Seether at First Bank Amphitheater coming up on Tuesday, April 23rd. Be caller 5-615-737-1025 is our number. 615-737-1025. Caller 5 will win a pair of tickets to see Stained with special guest Seether at First Bank Amphitheater coming up on Tuesday, April 23rd. So Jaden, in the last segment, Joe called in and asked about T. Higgins. Obviously a natural connection there with Brian Callahan as the OC for T. Higgins' entire career to this point. T. Higgins, we'll see what happens with him via free agency. If he makes it to that point, whether or not Cincinnati decides to franchise tag him, there's a lot that has to actually happen for T. Higgins to make it to free agency, to become available for the Titans. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that he does become a free agent and that Cincinnati decides to go in a different direction. Does this make it more likely, in your mind, that T. Higgins could end up with the Tennessee Titans with Brian Callahan now the head coach?
It's a great question. I don't know, how much T. Higgins likes Brian Callahan, but obviously they've worked closely together. Things have gone pretty well there. If you're T. Higgins, there's a lot of things that could happen. The Bengals, of course, could tag him, and they could tag him and they could trade him. And that's another thing here. So, there's still, the Bengals still kind of hold cards here in this situation. But if they decide that, that they can't make it work, then you would think that this would be a prime possibility. If you're T. Higgins, if you are out there on the open market, where on the list is like the coach who ran the offense you've been in that you succeeded in, that if you liked working with them, that you liked working with? Where is it on the list that also includes what's the roster look like? Do they well, I shouldn't say do they throw it. He knows what the offense is, but what's the roster look like? How good are they? What's the money situation compared to other places? I mean, he's if he's out there, he is a highly coveted guy. But you have to assume there's some benefit to that if it gets to that, right? You have to assume that considering all the success he's had and considering what the word on Brian Callahan is in general, that it would be a little bit of an edge.
Yeah, I would think so. Look, T. Higgins is from the state. Not that that's the be-all, end-all. I mean, really, it's going to come down to the money, right? Like, money is a big part of it, and who's willing to pay him money where he's got an opportunity in his mind to, be a number one guy and go try to win. And like I said, Cincinnati, what are they going to do? Are they going to franchise tag him? Are they going to be able to come to terms with a long-term deal? Because I still think their hope, and it makes sense, would be to have Burrow locked up long-term, Jamar Chase eventually locked up long-term, and T. Higgins. Now, if it comes down to it, my guess is, Joe, they've already got Burrow locked up, and, they would choose Jamar Chase over T. Higgins, would be my guess. So, look, we've talked to Charles Robinson at different points about that throughout the year, and he says he thinks there's a real possibility that, T. Higgins could end up out there and available. So we'll see. There's a lot that has to go down between now and then, but I would think that this doesn't hurt the Titans' chances to get that done. And we've talked about the holes they got to fill, and it starts on the offensive line. But getting T. Higgins in here would be obviously a huge boost to this team. It is interesting, too, Joe, because, look, the Bengals have had their own offensive line struggles. We saw that up close and personal here in the playoff game a couple years ago, right, where the Titans got 9 sacks in the game. It was well documented how bad that offensive line was for Cincinnati, and yet they found their way to the Super Bowl. Now, they also had Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, which helps you offset an offensive line a little bit. But Brian Callahan was a part of that. He was able to overcome a bad offensive line. And I'll tell you another thing that makes that pretty interesting, Joe, that I thought about last night. Look, the Bengals had a chance with a pretty high draft pick, and they had their choice between Jamar Chase and Penei Sewell, offensive tackle, and they went Jamar Chase. Everybody just assumes the Titans are going to take an offensive tackle, and I still think that makes by far the most sense for them to do. But it is an interesting situation. Like, if there's a skill player there that they absolutely love, be that a Brock Bowers or a Malik Neighbors or whoever it is, we've seen Brian Callahan be involved with a team that took the skill guy over the offensive line guy, and it worked out pretty well for that team. So I'm just saying. Thought about that last night.
Yeah, no, it's a fair thing. Someone brought that up in the text line too. Like, based on past history, maybe he wouldn't take the tackle. We do have – it's always good on days like this to balance things out with some negative thoughts, sure. I think. So Ben in the text line, Hyundai.com says, O-line development. I think Brian's O-lines have been very underwhelming, even if they supposedly revamped it after the Super Bowl, and that's our biggest issue already. Most of my family are Bengals fans, and they're glad he's gone because Burrow has been hurt too much. I think it's a good hire, but only if he gets a good O-line coach. Yeah, look, hey, it's a fair protection of Burrow has not been up to par. They had, as we talked about, they made that choice. People ripped that choice. I think the reason I wouldn't necessarily look at that choice and say that's what he's, that's just how he thinks. Jamar Chase it's Jamar freaking Chase. I know.
I think it'd be one thing if they had a chance to take Marvin Harrison, right?
Exactly. So look, maybe they think that Roma Dunze is that level of guy or something like that. But I would put good money on if they're just at 7 and Joe Alt is there for them, that they would go that route. And look, Brian Callahan, I agree on the O-line coach. I think that's important. I think having Bill Callahan in would be a huge deal for the Titans. Also, this is something where that is a fair – again, put more emphasis on it. The Bengals did put a lot of emphasis on it. They didn't draft Sewell that day, who, by the way, is probably going to be the most fun right tackle in the history of the league to watch. as he runs all over the field blasting people with the Lions. But they had put a lot of resources into trying to fix the line after they made the Super Bowl with a bad one.
So let me ask you this. In terms of the organization now, you've got your guy. He's an offensive guru, whatever term you want to use there. He's, a young and up-and-coming offensive hire. And then there's the collaboration buzzword part of this too. Amy Adams-Strunk said at the end of this, she was going to let everybody know who's got final say, what that structure looks like with Rand Carthon in place and that partnership. So how do you view that now with Brian Callahan being the guy? What do you think the final say structure looks like, and what does this hire tell you about the path the Titans are trying to take forward here with kind of that new age of thinking offensive football in the NFL?
Well, I hope they do. I hope they don't go to we're just going to collaborate, because she said she's going to say it. So just say it. To me, Rand Carthon led this search, got his guy. Rand Carthon's the GM. Rand Carthon has the final say. I mean, that to me is what it should be. Kyle Shanahan goes to San Francisco, and it's more like he picked the GM and all that stuff. Well, Kyle Shanahan had also been a Super Bowl OC in Atlanta, and before that, of course, he had worked with his dad.
Brian Callahan was the Super Bowl OC in Cincinnati. I'm just saying.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. I guess like Kyle Shanahan, by the time he got that job, was like the chosen one.
He was.
He
was very coveted. Yes.
So I don't have a problem if it's the other way around. And it's like, and essentially it comes down to Brian has final say, and who knows what the conversations were in the interview process. He certainly could have been hired by somebody else, and they certainly didn't let him leave yesterday. Is that something that he wanted to hammer out? I don't know. To me, it should be Carthon. By the way, just real quick, that Mike Shanahan staff with Washington, okay, 10 years ago, you got Kyle is the OC, LaFleur QB coach, Sean McVay tight ends coach, Mike McDaniel offensive assistant, Raheem Morris defensive back coach, and Bobby Slowick defensive assistant.
That's pretty good.
That's all right. That's not bad. And he's the godfather, Mike Shanahan. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it is a collaboration. It would be good to have just the clarification on that. Do they think enough of Brian Callahan? And maybe, again, was it part of a negotiation that it's like, yeah, okay, you're the coach. You got final say. You got the McVay situation. You got the Shanahan situation. Or is it because Carthon hired him and they went through it? Carthon now is the more traditional GM. Either way, yes, it's a collaboration, of course. All of these things have to be every team in this league better be a collaboration, or else I don't think there's any way to succeed.
It's really funny, like the coaching staff you just listed off that was in Washington under Shanahan. They went 6-10, 5-11, 10-6, 3-13. That just kind of goes to show you how important ownership is in this league.
And players.
Yeah.
Yeah. Players are more important than coaches.
It's pretty incredible with that coaching staff that was the case. By the way, Ed
how about that?
On the text line driven by WilsonCountyHyundai.com says, who will be the first reporter to ask about the role of blocking wide receivers? I nominate you, Rexrode.
Well, I mean, specifically, I'm going to say, will you re-sign NWI, and will it be a max deal?
How impressed were you by NWI's blocking when you watch it on film? Is that why you took the job?
That's a good follow-up.
Question needs to be asked.
I'll save that for later.
That's right. Coming up next, we'll be joined by Caroline Fenton. We'll get her thoughts on the hiring of Brian Callahan as the next head coach of the Tennessee Titans. That's next. This is Robby and Rexrode, 102.5, 106.3 The Game. Hour 2, Robby and Rexrode, 102.5, 106.3 The Game, brought to you by Chuck McDowell and Medical House Calls, Middle Tennessee's best medical care in the comfort and safety of your own home. For more information, go to medicalhousecalls.com. Medical House Calls, where the nearest clinic is your home. Robby Stanley, Joe Rexrode, Nick Keys are here with you on this Tuesday morning. And as we are every Tuesday morning at 7 o'clock, we welcome in our friend Caroline Fenton to the program, host of Caroline, Willie, and D. Mace. Caroline, good morning. How are you?
We have a coach.
We do.
An offensive head coach. I'm doing great.
Well, I was going to ask you what you think of the hire, but by the sound of that, I sense some relief from Caroline Fenton this morning that the Titans have gone with an offensive head coach in Brian Callahan.
You know, Robby, it is relief. It is. It's a mix between relief and excitement, because when I saw yesterday that the Titans were bringing in Dan Quinn for a second interview, I thought, you got to be freaking kidding me. Dan Quinn? Really? Of all of the candidates that they hired. And at the beginning of the process, I said, look, I want an offensive head coach. If they did bring in a defensive head coach, I would just need a little bit more explanation as to what your plan is with the quarterback. But as time continued to go on, and I guess it hasn't, that sounds a little bit dramatic. It really hasn't been that long of a process considering so many other vacancies that have yet to be filled in the NFL. But as the process went on, I became more and more and more convinced that it needed to be an offensive guy. So when I saw Dan Quinn, I thought, my goodness, a defensive head coach, whose defenses underperform. Like, didn't we just get rid of that? Like, didn't the Titans just fire a defensive head coach who traditionally has had underperforming defenses? So it is relief and it is excitement. Brian Callahan was my number one option. And really the main reason being his history with developing young quarterbacks and his history, at least with Joe Burrow, bringing in the pieces around the young quarterback. That when Joe Burrow got drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals, they had nothing, essentially nothing. They didn't have an offensive line. They didn't have as robust of a pass-catching core as they do now. So Brian Callahan has been there in lockstep with the organization with building around that young quarterback. I'm not saying Will Levis is Joe Burrow, but seeing what he did to build around Joe Burrow and also what he did with Jake Browning. Like, I don't think that it should just be swept under the rug that they went 4-2 with a backup quarterback.
No, I think Browning this year absolutely elevated him as a candidate in this league.
Totally.
I think what happened there absolutely did. Okay, real quick, I do have to say, like, why all the hate for Dan Quinn? The guy's been to the Super Bowl. I know this last time out was bad, but his Cowboys defense has been fantastic. Is it because of the backward hat? The backward hat kind of bothers me, but like, why do people hate Dan Quinn?
You know, it might be the backwards hat.
It might be.
There we go.
Not
It's like the Kirby Smart visor.
It's exactly like the visor, or the Biff Poggi cutoff T-shirt. I think it for me is, 'cause you're right. You know, like, he has the pedigree. He's been to Super Bowls. He won a Super Bowl as a defensive coordinator. I think it's just the defensive side of the ball. I didn't want a coach to come in that is a defensive head coach. And this is a what have you done for me lately league. And although the Cowboys defense was one of the best in the NFL this year, the last that we saw of a Dan Quinn unit was a horrendous Dallas Cowboys defense that just choked away a playoff game at home against a Packer team, no offense, Robby, that really, kind of just lucked into the playoffs. So that, to me, it puts a bad taste in my mouth. And D-Mace and I were talking about this. You can't count them out for just one game. And I know that, but it was a really important game. It was a game that could have gotten Mike McCarthy fired and probably should have gotten Mike McCarthy fired. It's what you do in playoff games that matter. Like, Ryan Tannehill around the league is not viewed as a very good quarterback. Why? Because he threw 3 interceptions in a playoff game. Like, there's a reason why Lamar Jackson has this reputation of, good quarterback, can't win you the big one. And it's because that matters what you do in playoff games.
Oh, okay. Joe, I thought you had another question. So with that in mind,
oh,
Caroline,
no, sorry.
No, you're good. With that
Wake
in
up,
mind,
Joe.
It's your turn. It's Robbie's turn.
You didn't ask a question. Anyway, with
Yes,
that
I did.
in
I asked
mind,
about Dan Quinn.
that was a statement, not a question. With that in mind, as you look at the hiring now, what do you think about OC? Thomas Brown, Liam Cohen. What do you make of a lot of people making the obvious connection between Liam Cohen and Will Levis? What do you make of that partnership? And would that be something you would consider if you're Brian Callahan hiring an OC?
Totally. Absolutely. I would consider bringing in Liam Cohen. That he has the Sean McVay ties to, the West Coast offense, and obviously the ties to Will Levis. That Will Levis's best year of his college career came under the direction of Liam Cohen. So it's that he was able to get something out of Will Levis that we really that we didn't see in his second year at Kentucky. And also it's the consistency, because Will Levis, if you think about it, he's now had 3 offensive coordinators in 3 years. That's hard to do, especially for a young quarterback. I want consistency for Will Levis. It's part of the reason why I wanted an offensive head coach. You bring in a defensive guy, or you bring in kind of like the Dan Campbell kind of guy. You bring in a great OC to help the young quarterback. Well, history has shown that the shelf life of a really good offensive coordinator is about 2 to 3 years, if not shorter. So I want consistency. So Liam Cohen absolutely would be a name that I would be interested in. I know Thomas Brown is an interesting name as well, because that was kind of the thought yesterday when Thomas Brown and Brian Callahan were brought in for second interviews of, maybe Thomas Brown can be the OC. I'm not opposed to that in the slightest. I want Brian Callahan to make that decision, though. I don't want that to be an Amy Adams Strunk and Rand Carthon decision of, hey, we really liked this guy when we interviewed him, so let's bring him in as the offensive coordinator because we don't really think he's quite ready for the head coaching position. I'm done with forced marriages in this franchise. If you bring in the offensive head coach that wants to have a big hand in the offense, which I have no problem with, he should bring in his guy. If that guy is Thomas Brown, then great, but I that should be his decision to make.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. It shouldn't be. Almost when Vrabel came in, it was almost a little bit of like, Mike, what do you think of Matt LaFleur? And it worked out. It worked out fine for all parties, at least for a while. But I'm with you on that. Now, a lot of teams obviously passed on Will Levis, but a lot of the teams that passed on Will Levis had no need for a quarterback. The Bengals are certainly one of those teams. They weren't looking at anybody's quarterbacks. Do you take this as, I guess, confirmation that Brian Callahan is a believer in Will Levis?
I think it kind of has to be, because Brian Callahan knows that he's taking this job and it hinges on the success or the failure of Will Levis. That if Will Levis doesn't turn into, and he doesn't need to be Patrick Mahomes, league MVP, but if Will Levis doesn't turn into your future franchise quarterback, which is what I believed Rand and Amy saw Will Levis as when they traded up to draft him in the second round of this past year's draft, that they did view him as the future franchise quarterback. This is also something that I struggle with, is as a head coaching candidate, to what extent can you be completely transparent about your feelings about the quarterback, knowing that your job probably hinges on the success of that quarterback? Like if Brian Callahan says, look, I really think that I can do something with this guy, that with just the sheer arm talent, his attitude, all things considered, I really think that he can be great in this league, but also there are a few things that are maybe some red flags for me. And I'm just going to be really honest with you. This is, if I can't work with Will Levis, so on and so forth. But also, if you say that to Amy Adams Strunk and Rand Carthon, that, look, these are my concerns about the young quarterback, I'm going to be upfront with those things from the beginning. Do not get the job because you don't wholeheartedly believe in the quarterback. To a certain extent, you almost have to lie that you do wholeheartedly believe in the quarterback. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how those conversations go in those interviews, that if you're not 100% will go, do you not get the job? Do you only get the job if you wholeheartedly believe in the young quarterback? I kind of tend to believe yes. So it would have to be full belief from Brian Callahan in Will Levis, because that's ultimately his job.
So, Caroline, let me ask you this. Obviously he's been around a Cincinnati offense that when everybody's been healthy has been very, very good, and Joe Burrow's a huge part of that. He has not been the primary play caller with that offense. Does that concern you? How I guess, on the grand scheme of things, how concerning is it to you that he has not called plays to this point?
Yeah, it's really not that overly concerning to me. Mike McDaniel didn't call plays before he got to Miami. So it's not the end-all, be-all for me, especially if you do plan on bringing in an offensive coordinator to do that, to call the plays. But I did see that. Did you see this tweet from Justin Mello, who is like the king of roster cutdown day? That he's the one that has all of the scoop before everybody else of who makes the 53-man roster. He tweeted something out, and I'm stalling because I'm trying to find it. He tweeted,
I'm trying to too.
I'd expect Brian
You beat me.
Callahan to call plays in Tennessee, regardless of who he hires its offensive coordinator. Just a point to be noted.
Yeah.
I don't know if that is based off of any sort of insight or if that's just Justin Mello's feeling or his sense or his opinion. But really, overall, to me, it's not the end all be all. To me, the biggest thing is his track record with developing the quarterbacks.
Yeah, I actually did see that last night, and it does seem to be that's just kind of how these guys view this, right? It just seems to be the way they all do it. Like McDaniel goes in and takes over, and there is obviously that continuity you're going to have if things are successful. And people are hiring away your OCs, you got that continuity locked in, which I think people probably like. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
Did Zach Taylor call plays before he was head coach in Cincinnati?
He did not. In fact, Zach Taylor was just the QB coach.
Yeah.
He was one year as the QB coach with the Rams. He was 35 years old. And at the time, people were like, holy crap. Like, if you shook Sean McVay's hand in an elevator, you'll get a job. But it worked out all right.
Yeah, it's worked out pretty well.
It worked out just fine. And I do, whenever Brian Callahan was first announced as a candidate, one of my first thoughts was, okay, well, is that offense great because you have Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins? And, I've seen teams that are essentially coached by Joe Burrow, and those teams turned out to be pretty good. So is it because of your quarterback and what you have around the quarterback, or is it because of the offensive coordinator, and is it because of the head coach? And I read that article in The Athletic by your colleague Joe, and I'm excited to hear him on the show later.
Yes.
And it said that there's also kind of an art to not screwing up the young quarterback.
Yeah.
And I think that there is a whole lot of truth to that. Not to sound like a Brian Callahan bobo, but look at Baker Mayfield. Like, Baker Mayfield looks pretty good in Tampa Bay. But he was totally screwed up by the Browns because they just didn't know how to manage the young quarterback. They didn't put the right pieces around the young quarterback. They didn't have consistency for the young quarterback. It was a revolving door at offensive coordinator and head coach. So I do think that there is a good bit of truth to drafting the young elite quarterback and also providing the right environment and pieces around the young quarterback to thrive.
Now, listen, Caroline, I'm not going to tolerate Coach O slander on this program. Great coach.
You know what, Robby? I love Coach O. Love him dearly. That he did not coach that team. That was not his team.
Joe, go throw me a touchdown, Joe. Throw me a touchdown.
Joe, I need you to throw the ball here. Thank you.
Joe, I would appreciate it if you went out and scored a touchdown here. Thank you.
Hey, it worked.
His crushing
Did a great
Red Bull
job.
cans on his head was a real integral part
Maybe
of
the greatest college
that
football team of all time.
national
It worked.
championship
That's
team.
right.
Isn't that crazy? Maybe one of the best college football teams of all time, and that head coach is essentially just a caricature of himself.
Just
Got
beautiful.
some good lats, though. Some good
But
triceps.
He did.
There is an art of just getting the heck out of the way.
There is that.
And he did that. He got out of the way for everybody else to just worry about the X's and O's, and he provided a whole lot of comedy for all of us in the time being, which I appreciate.
Caroline, thank you very much. We'll be listening coming up at 11 o'clock, and should be a good one today. Lots to get into.
A lot to get into today. Appreciate y'all. Have a good one.
Caroline Fenton, our guest here on Robby and Rexrode. You can check her out every morning starting at 11 o'clock. Here on 102.5, 106.3 The Game. And they'll have a lot to get to with the Brian Callahan hiring as well. We'll continue to react to Brian Callahan as the next head coach of the Tennessee Titans coming up next. Robby and Rexrode, 102.5, 106.3 The Game. Welcome back in. Robby and Rexrode, 102.5, 106.3 The Game. Robbie Stanley, Joe Rexrode, Nick Keys are here with you on this Tuesday morning. Appreciate Caroline Fenton for being with us in the last segment. We'll be joined by Paul Dehner coming up at 8 o'clock. He covers the Bengals for The Athletic. We'll get his thoughts on Brian Callahan. He has been around Brian Callahan a lot. So we'll get his thoughts on the new hire for the Tennessee Titans and what to look forward to there. Joe, the sense I get on the text line so far, not that this is surprising, is pretty good excitement for the Titans fans based on the hiring of Brian Callahan and what it signifies, right? You know, we talked about the hiring of an offensive coach, and I said it at the start, like, to me, it didn't absolutely have to be an offensive coach. That would have been my preference. But if you felt like one of these defensive guys was the best person for the job, then I think that's the way you should have gone. Having said that, I am absolutely glad that they ended up with an offensive coach, and we'll see what that looks like, how different the approach is as they move forward. And now, you know, we talk so much about the Vrabel and the Carthon relationship part of this. With Callahan coming in, how do Callahan and Carthon work together? What does that process look like? And, you know, based on what we've seen in Cincinnati, and Caroline brings up an interesting point, you know, Callahan, we've talked about the background throughout the show today. It's an impressive background. He's been around a lot of really good quarterbacks. He's been around a lot of really good coaches in his career. So everything about that I like. As OC in Cincinnati, not calling the plays, and also having a crazy amount of talent with Burrow and Higgins and Jamar Chase. And look, Tyler Boyd's no slouch. I mean, he's a pretty good third receiver that they've had there too. There's a lot of talent that they've had in Cincinnati. So we talk about it all the time. It's a players' league, and the players are more important than the coaches. How does that translate here to, regardless of what the Titans do this offseason, Joe, a roster that is not going to be as loaded on the offensive side of the ball as Cincinnati's is, for sure?
Yeah, Jimmy's and Joe's over X's and O's is a football maxim that will always be true. So, as Caroline brought up, hey, good job by that coaching staff without question. And, yeah, there's a lot of nuance to it, and I thought that was a great point by Paul Dehner, line about sort of like, you know, some of this is not, you know, you think about developing a quarterback, but also like, you know, the things you don't do, and you don't screw up the quarterback, right? But you can be the greatest coach in the history of mankind if you don't have the players. Great, it doesn't matter. Bill Belichick being the prime example right now, who, by the way, I mean, I see the Falcons continuing to interview a bunch of other people. I mean, I guess at this point, I'm a little surprised they haven't just pulled the trigger on Bill Belichick. I mean, how humbling would that be if, like, they hire Vrabel or, you know, somebody else instead of him with the Falcons? But it is about the players. But of course, I don't know what the percentage is. What's the percentage? You know what I think the way to look at this is? I was thinking about this the other day, Robbie. Look at it like it was kind of an interaction I had on Twitter with somebody, but look at it in terms of salary. Look at it in terms of value.
Yeah.
Okay. So if your coach, I mean, I think NFL coaches now are making, you know, several million a year. Let's say, you know, whatever, 8 million. Okay. Let's say, you know, coaching salary is 8 million. Okay. Well, how many guys on the roster make more of that? The quarterback, a good quarterback makes 4 times that.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
At least.
So, yeah. So let there be no doubt about what's more important. And then you probably have what, 3 to 5 other players who probably make more, depending on the team.
Sure.
So that's about it, right? Then the head coach slots in. And that to me is about right. Like, it's super important. It's obviously hugely important. It's not as important as having great players who win their one-on-one matchups all the time and dominate and make plays that, you know, you draw up whatever you want. They're going to make plays. That's where it is. So it's still hugely important, but I think some people still make it more important than it is.
This question from John on the text line: with Bobby Slowick not being the final pick, do you think it's more likely the Titans ruled him out or that he ruled out the Titans? What do you think of that?
Again, we'll see how this works out. It's pretty obvious that Brian Callahan was the Titans' choice.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I'm with you, as we talked about already. cast the wide net, talk to defensive coaches, have an open mind. But I think Brian Callahan is pretty clear. They were on him from the start. You'll remember, Paul Kaharski will have him in tomorrow. He did mention a couple weeks ago, he's heard from people who aren't sure Slowick is ready.
Right.
Maybe Slowick this year does what Ben Johnson did last year with the Lions. Ben Johnson could have had a head coaching job. He said, I'm gonna stay here. It's going well. Plus, he knew he had a good team this year. It's not like the window is going to close on him. It was, if anything, it was going to open, and it has. It has opened more for Ben Johnson. He's going to command a big number. And I think probably have his pick of multiple jobs. Maybe that's how Slowick's looking at it too. The Texans probably going to be pretty good next year. C.J. Stroud, it all looks pretty good. So, and I don't know, maybe he'll get hired, but it seems like maybe the feeling on him was not quite ready. Brian Callahan has been the Bengals OC for 5 years.
We'll have more of your thoughts on Brian Callahan to the Titans, 615-737-1025. What do you make of the hire, and what's your excitement level about what this could mean for Will Levis specifically as the Titans move forward here? We'll get into that coming up next. You're listening to Robby and Rexrode, 102.5, 106.3, The Game. Tune in to 93.3 Classic Hits tomorrow night for MTSU men's basketball. The Blue Raiders are at home taking on Jacksonville State with pregame beginning at 6 o'clock, tip-off at 6:30. Coverage also available on the 93.3 Classic app and at 93.3classichits.com. Also, make sure you tune in to 94.9 The Fan this Saturday for Vanderbilt men's basketball. Commodores taking on Tennessee at home. Tip-off at 5 o'clock, pregame at 4:30. Coverage also available on the 94.9 The Fan app. Robbie Stanley, Joe Rexrode, Nick Keyser here with you on this Tuesday morning. We'll have the Rex Rant with Joe Rexrode coming up at 7:45. Paul Daner from The Athletic will join us at 8 o'clock, covers the Cincinnati Bengals. We'll get his perspective on Brian Callahan and what he's seen from the new Titans head coach during his tenure in Cincinnati as well. So, Joe, what does this mean specifically for Will Levis? You've gone out, you've hired an offensive head coach in a system that Levis is familiar with. We'll see what the offensive coordinator hire ends up looking like. And look, so much of Levis and whether or not he's going to be successful still comes down to, can Rand Carthon and the Titans fix the offensive line? Can they find some weapons for Levis via in the draft or free agency this season and in seasons to come here? But if you're Will Levis, how you feeling today with the hiring of Brian Callahan and what that could mean for you starting next season as quarterback of the Tennessee Titans?
Yeah, look, I think Will Levis was excited about playing for Mike Vrabel. I know that he and his family really liked that style of coach, and I think it was pretty clear at the end of the season that Will Levis was really hoping that what was about to happen wasn't going to happen. But you turn the page, and I would think that Will Levis would be pretty excited about this. Probably even triple the excitement if it happens that Liam Cohen ends up in here as OC. But either way, I would have to think that he would be excited. I mean, I suppose he could have the same question others do, which is like, man, they did get Joe Burrow hit a lot. Will Levis knows that life already after 1 year in the NFL. But, TD texted me, and we've talked about this, but basically you have to look at this like this is clear confirmation that he's a believer in Levis, and he wouldn't take it if he believes in the QB, right? Now, I did say back to TD until draft night when the Titans trade up and take Jaden Daniels, and actually we find out the interview said, I'll take the job as long as you're getting rid of Will Levis. As long as you're doing that, yes. Then you got Brian Callahan.
Anybody have Tom Brady's number? Call him out of retirement.
No, there you go.
Yeah.
No, I think so. So Will Levis, and that's the thing. If you're Will Levis, along with thinking about what the scheme will be, and the fact that you're essentially going back to your college offense, in which you flourished and became an NFL prospect, you also should look at this like, well, this is the first outside hire of the cycle, and this is pretty clearly the guy who was very high on the Titans list, and he took it despite all the issues, all the stuff that happened with Amy Armstrong and Vrabel, firing Robinson, firing Vrabel, bad team, all the things all the cons you could write down on a list about the Titans. He took it. If you're Will Levis, you should probably feel pretty good about that, because when it comes down to it, I think it has to be seen as confirmation that he believes Will Levis can be a great quarterback. Otherwise, he's signing up for a job that's not going to work and is going to ultimately lead to his firing.
Yeah, no question about it. Our buddy Buck Rising from A to Z Sports has come out with some new thoughts on the Titans' hiring of Brian Callahan, and I'll just read a snippet from what he's put out at atozsports.com, Joe. Keep an eye on Carolina Panthers offensive coordinator Thomas Brown. Tennessee is interested in bringing in Brown in the same role to help Callahan implement his system, according to team sources. It is my understanding that Callahan plans to be the Titans' play caller as well as their head coach, setting up a system like the one in Cincinnati between Callahan and Bengals head coach Zach Taylor will be the objective. So Buck putting it out there that Brian Callahan plans to be the play caller, which is not surprising, but we did wonder if that would actually be the case after taking the job.
Yeah, and that's how these guys do it, right? So that's to be expected. The OC thing is interesting. I've talked up Thomas Brown. He rough year in Carolina all the way around for everybody involved, but yeah, it's hard to put much of that on him. He's a McVay guy. He's a fast riser like Zach Taylor was. That's the link. Thomas Brown, the link to Callahan is through McVay, right? Zach Taylor, those are McVay tree. So Callahan and Brown have not worked together. They may know each other well. I don't know. I agree with what Caroline said. You want Brian Callahan to feel autonomy for that choice.
Agreed.
And I think any sort of arranged marriage idea is a bad one. But if it's one of those things where they've talked it through and look, I think Thomas Brown's a head coach candidate in this league. I think he will be a head coach in this league based on everything I know about him. So he's an appealing candidate. I just don't know the Callahan. But then again, I mean, you could say the same thing about Liam Cohen, right? I mean, he's also went to LA. They're all connected through McVay. But the Liam Cohen thing obviously is the Levis link. But I think Thomas Brown would be an appealing hire as OC.
Does McVay get royalties for all this stuff? Like, does he start charging for teams hiring coaches that are connected to him?
It's amazing, man. I mean, because and of course Shanahan too. I mean, It's a race between those two. And of course, Shanahan had a little trouble. Now wait a minute, because Brandon Staley, which one was he? Was he with McVay or
he's
Shanahan?
McVay?
Okay, so there's a rough one on his side, and then of course Robert Saleh on the Shanahan side. Well, we'll see.
Both those guys are defensive though. It doesn't matter.
I know, but see now Shanahan throws in D'Amico Ryans. He's got a D guy who's working out. So I mean, my gosh, the whole league is just gonna be taken over by like whoever right now. Just look at their staffs. Like whoever are quality control people right now, just like in 2034, they'll all be like the head coaches of the NFL.
Exactly. Let's go back to our 102.5 The Game phone line, driven by WilsonCountyHyundai.com. Welcome in Adam in Portland. Adam, good morning. Thanks for calling in.
Hey, boys. Hey, great hire. I'm so happy. A quick question. There is zero reason why we should have a bad offensive line, right? Like we had two awesome offensive line coaches that have already said publicly that they would like to be here, right? Or at least Munchak said he wanted to, and I imagine dude's going to bring his dad, or probably should bring his dad. Like, there's no reason we should suck at offensive line coach now, right? Unless I'm missing something, there's no reason that guy shouldn't bring one of those two guys.
Well, the reason would be that they select the wrong player. Like, I still think they got a lot of work to do on the offensive line player-wise, but I would expect, number one, I think your first round pick this year is going to go towards the left tackle, and I would expect that Bill Callahan is probably going to be the offensive line coach. I guess it could be Munchak, but to your point, Adam, I think the offensive line should be improved if you make the right decisions personnel-wise.
Do you remember, and this last thing, man, do you remember Bill Callahan as head coach of the Raiders back in the day? Like, and their offense was good. He made, 80-year-old receivers legit. Like, he would get them open. So there's no reason he shouldn't be whispering stuff in them rooms. I don't know. I feel really good about this hire, man. I started, first, nobody ever heard of these guys before this season. I hate the people who are like, I've been watching him for years. No, you haven't. I've never heard of the dude from Houston until he could have possibly been my head coach. But the more I started looking into him, I'm like, okay, Callahan makes me feel way better than Slowick does. So I like the hire.
Thanks for the call, Adam. Appreciate it. Some positivity from Adam in Portland, Joe.
Yeah, I don't know what to do with that. LD asked if anybody has checked on him because he thought he wanted a veteran coach or defensive guy, and I responded. I said, I'm pretty sure he was mad about the Vrabel firing and wants Vrabel back. Isn't that right?
Well, he wanted Vrabel
out.
Is he gone?
Is he gone? I know. I'm kidding. He's the biggest Vrabel hater in the 615, I think.
He loved him.
So it's good.
Though.
It's good to hear. It's good to hear Adam happy. Adam's happy now. It's good to hear. He had a rough fall.
He did. It's a new breath of life for Adam in Portland. 615-737-1025, our phone number. The Rex Rant with Joe Rexrode is coming up next. You're listening to Robby and Rexrode, 102.5, 106.3, The Game.
Sometimes he wakes up on the wrong side of the bed. And sometimes he's just, well, Joe.
Awkward moment. Let's do it.
This is the Rex Rant. Now on Robby and Rexrode.
Go find you somebody from Sweden or something and pay him and give him some Botox. You'll be good, Joe.
This is so frustrating.
He's kind of ugly, though.
It is that time of the day, time for the Rex Rant with Joe Rexrode. You can check it out every morning at 7:45 here on the program. Joe Rexrode's Rant of the Day. Joseph, with either Botox or no Botox in the background, I turn things over to you.
Yeah, I figured that Botox thing might become a drop. Thanks a lot, Mark. Very disappointed. You can't tell that I'm a constant Botox guy already. I mean,
I'm just focused on the Lego hair.
Yeah. That's also, I put Botox in my hair too.
That's good.
Yeah, that's smart, right? All right, let's have some negativity. It's time to complain because I feel it's just too much. It's been an hour and 45 minutes of yay, Brian Callahan.
A lot of sunshine around here.
Oh yeah, that's it. It's about time to get. Yeah. So how about Matt on the text line? What's so special about Callahan? Good question, Matt. But I want to go to this texter. You put your name on your text. 757 area code, which is where I used to be my area code in Virginia. But I always forget your name. Complains about a lot of things. I really appreciate it. So let me read this text on the text line driven by WilsonCountyHoney.com. Somehow the Titans have 0 Super Bowls, and I think we all know firing Mike Vrabel was a mistake. Some of us don't want to admit that. But the team is not better just because we hired a so-called offensive guru first-time head coach. How many Super Bowls has the Shanahan tree won? My count is 1, McVay.
Ooh.
Well, hey, there are questions. The play calling question is a question. Will this work out? We don't know for sure. Again, I totally flopped and didn't throw Nathaniel Hackett. I mean, he is a direct fail from this tree. I mean, it's the LaFleur tree, but there's a fail as a head coach. Doesn't always work out. Now, I would say, of course, Kyle has been to a Super Bowl as a head coach. There's Taylor has been to a Super Bowl as a head coach. So, they're circling around. There's probably going to be more success. But, hey, there's no guarantee this is going to work out. There's no guarantee at all. Yesterday was a good day. This is a good hire, I believe, for the Titans, given all the information we have. Doesn't mean it will work. And, again, let's talk about the most important thing, which we recently did on the program. I mean, if they don't quickly, to me, pretty quickly, revamp and turn over this roster, then the negativity will come quickly because like next year they're going to go like 6-11 again. So there are no guarantees at all with this hire. I appreciate seeing some people who are questioning it, who are skeptical of it, because there's just absolutely nothing guaranteed in this league. So far, it's been a high hit rate with the McVay-Shanahan tree and then branches off that tree, but it doesn't mean that this one, and I know if you're a Titans fan right now, feeling rough about things, feeling rough about the way things have gone, long time suffering, although, those 1 seeds that lost at home, you're probably like, well, this will be the one that doesn't work out. So, good. Let's have some negativity.
Well, it's been interesting because, like, you think about the McVay tree, the Shanahan tree, and I think of those two specifically. Like, McVay came in as head coach and took over a team that had Jared Goff as the quarterback, right? So they spent the first overall pick on Jared Goff, got to a Super Bowl with Jared Goff, and then decided shortly after that, 2 years later, to make the change and to make the trade and go get Stafford. They win the Super Bowl with Stafford. Kyle Shanahan had Jimmy Garoppolo as his quarterback, made it to the Super Bowl with Jimmy G, and then started shuffling that around, and now Brock Purdy is the quarterback, and we'll see what they do. They got a chance to get back to a Super Bowl starting on Sunday. It's been like Shanahan and McVay both had enough team success to make it through like their first quarterback and start to move into their second one, right? If they determine that their first guy wasn't the guy for them. Like, first off, can Brian Callahan maximize Will Levis to the point where he is the guy. And the second part of that, Joe, is if we get a year down the road or 2 years down the road and we determine that Will Levis is not, in fact, the guy, will Brian Callahan get the opportunity to have the next guy? Because a lot of times in this league, you don't get that opportunity. And it's interesting that, McVay and Shanahan both had enough team success. It's not like Jimmy G wasn't a horrible quarterback and Jared Goff wasn't a horrible quarterback. So
he almost won the Super Bowl.
It's not the best example, but I'm just saying that they moved from one quarterback to the next because they had enough team success to do so. I mean, Zach Taylor got Joe Burrow, and that's what you're hoping the formula is here with Will Levis.
Yeah, well, and that is, and of course, Shanahan, they sold half the world to get Trey Lance, and then they go with Mr. Irrelevant, and he's the guy. It's which first of all tells you even the very trunk of this tree of genius still makes huge mistakes. Okay, but yeah, I would hope that if I'm Brian Callahan, I would hope that first of all, I do take this as confirmation he thinks Will Levis can be the guy, but also I would hope that he would get that opportunity. He didn't select Will Levis. He came in and inherited Will Levis. And so you would hope that he would have an opportunity if it turns out, okay, no, it's just not going to work out, that he would get the chance to get the next guy. But if you're Brian Callahan, I'd look at, again, how 2 years ago, as you pointed out yesterday on the show, Robby, 2 years to the day from that loss to the Bengals, imagine anyone saying, like, Vrabel will be fired in 2 years and this Bengals OC will be the head coach.
Yeah.
Okay. But, along with that, I mean, you think about, I just totally lost my train of thought. I had a great point I was making. Help me finish my point.
Well, you're talking about the hiring of Brian Callahan just 2 years ago, how everything can change, and getting that opportunity with the next quarterback, and that going back to McVay and Shanahan. I don't know where you're going with the point.
Yeah. My God. This is – I need to get out of my mom's basement and come do the show in the studio. But, yeah, I mean, think about how much things change in that time period. And, you just don't know. You should – a guy like Callahan, you would think, would have the opportunity to pivot if this doesn't work out, even if he's – fully on board with Will Levis as I believe he would be. But look, there's plenty of skepticism that should be allowed with any hire in this league. The latest text here says you'd all say any hire is amazing. So there we go. We said Vrabel was a perfect coach, infallible, absolutely best coach in the NFL, does everything right. Big love fest every day for him. And now we're going to say the same thing about Brian Callahan. It's amazing. Yes. Nothing wrong. Nothing could possibly go wrong.
I got a texter that says, I haven't seen so much hype around an offensive coordinator becoming a head coach since Josh McDaniels. How'd that work out? Really? You haven't seen one since Josh McDaniels?
You're a very selective consumer of the NFL. Yes, that definitely did not work out multiple times. There's look around the league, again, go with McVay and Shanahan and Zach Taylor and Mike McDaniel and on and on. I mean, and Matt LaFleur, those guys have all worked out to varying degrees. And again, not even part of this tree. Nick Sirianni, yeah, I know. Right now, that's not looking great. Shane Steichen in Indy, that looks pretty good right now. There's another one, too, that I mentioned today in the column who has worked out. There's been a lot more that have hit that haven't of late. Hackett, Kingsbury, those being, along with McDaniels being a couple notable exceptions. It's obviously not a guarantee. Nothing is.
615-737-1025 is our phone number. Coming up next, we'll be joined by Paul Daner from The Athletic, who covers the Cincinnati Bengals. He has been around Brian Callahan his entire time in Cincinnati. We'll get his thoughts on the hiring for the Titans and what Brian Callahan will be like as a coach, or at least what he thinks Brian Callahan will be like as a coach. We'll get into that coming up next. Robby and Rexrode, 102.5, 106.3, The Game. Final hour, Robby and Rexrode, 102.5, 106.3 The Game. Robbie Stanley, Joe Rexrode, Nick Keys are here with you on this Tuesday morning. The Titans hiring Brian Callahan to be their next head coach, the sixth head coach in the Tennessee Titans history, 20th overall in franchise history, dating back to the Oilers. And to help us talk more about that, we go to our 102.5 The Game phone line, driven by WilsonCountyHyundai.com. And welcome into our friend Paul Daner from The Athletic, who covers the Cincinnati Bengals. Paul, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. How's it going?
We're awesome. Appreciate you taking some time to be with us this morning. So, Paul, from your experience being around Brian Callahan, what have been your observations of the type of coach that he is, and what do you make of this hire by the Tennessee Titans?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of aspects here. The first one is the most obvious, is that, like, we know what this league is. It's can you develop quarterbacks? Do you understand quarterbacks? Do you understand quarterbacks' roles on the team and how to manage one when you have a great one? And Brian Callahan has had a front row seat and done that his entire career now. I mean, it started he was working alongside Peyton Manning in Denver for 5 years, and seeing him and his operation and building trust with Peyton Manning. You know how hard it is to build trust with Peyton Manning when you're some GA on the staff, but managed to do that there to the point that he got invited when Peyton Manning, is going to the Hall of Fame. I mean, and that's the type of personality and chemistry he's able to build with people. Then Stafford, same thing, and Burrow. It's easy to say, something I think that a lot of people think maybe held him and this entire offensive staff back as far as getting promotions was people look at the Bengals and say, yeah, Burrow did all that, right? And that's totally fair. I mean, apparently he does kind of walk on water in Cincinnati a little bit, but the bottom line is you have to know what to do when you have that guy and how to help that guy become more of that guy. And this staff knew perfectly how to do that with Burrow because Brian Callahan knew how to help take his game to the next level and also let him feel like he is the guy and take ownership over the entire team because he saw Peyton Manning do it. And that credibility really stood with people. But, the extra aspect of it is beyond the quarterback stuff and being around football his whole life. That's always struck me about him. He has a really, really great feel for culture and how to build in the modern NFL. And that's something the Bengals did really well here in understanding how to create relationships with players, how to find the types of players that build great cultures and things like that. The Bengals, I mean, to turn around a place that was as rock bottom as this franchise, like they did, they knew that was the only way to do it, and they'd seen it work in other places. And their ability to pinpoint the types of people and put those people in position of leadership and understand how that can grow and what that specifically needs to look like, to me was what always set him apart. And most people didn't see that or really understand that because they see quarterback guy, knows how to, work an offense and coordinate and all that stuff. That's great. But I always thought that set him apart to me as a head coach track because that was apparent as Zach Taylor's right-hand man with every decision, not just offensive decision, every decision throughout this entire sort of Bengals rebuild all the way back to 2019.
We're having trouble hearing Joe. We'll get Joe back online here in just a second. So how much do you think, Paul, what the Bengals were able to do with Jake Browning this year, how much did that elevate Brian Callahan in your mind?
Yeah, not in my mind, but I totally understand the outside mind of watching everything when Burrow does stuff, and you're like, wow, I mean, that's just Burrow's making this thing cook, and I understand that, and like I said, I mean, I feel like that definitely was used against this staff a little bit when evaluating them. And I think to an outside perspective, it was impossible to miss that they stayed relevant. They took this undrafted Jake Browning guy that they'd sort of been developing in the background and found a way to construct an offense that could make him work, to the point that he was one of the most efficient passers in football, even with a couple of struggling early games against the Steelers down the stretch. I mean, it was almost insane. But it was because they did a really good job of quickly evolving on the fly to find ways to make it all work with the skill set that they had. And that's something that they've done, over the course of his time here. They've been really nuanced and effective in how they evolve as the season goes. I mean, the year that, I guess last year, 2022 season, they ended up winning 10 games in a row before losing to the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game at the conclusion of the season. It was sparked by a decision on offense to really change the way they were doing their running game, to ditch the outside zone and go to more of the shotgun run downhill power gap scheme. And once they did that, understanding the types of, they had a bunch of new offensive linemen, they understood what that was and finally started to learn what they looked like after that first month. And next thing you know, that changed and they just took off. And they've done that multiple times where they've not been afraid to say, hey, we're not in this box. They showed up as Zach Taylor, Rams, wide zone, Todd Gurley, right? And they are 180 degrees from that now. They've never been afraid to move from year to year, from season to season, to find what scheme fits, because Brian Callahan has been in a number of them with a number of different types of quarterbacks, and that fits to why he's good for a place that's trying to find itself offensively, is that he knows a bunch of different buttons that you can press and has a history of pressing them effectively.
Okay. Does my microphone work? Is it working? All right, here we go.
I hear you.
All right. Now that I've figured out my microphone. All right. I got three for you, Paul. Okay.
Okay.
First of all, do you take this hire and Brian Callahan accepted this job as confirmation he believes in Will Levis? Do you think personnel final say matters to him? And do you think T. Higgins is a Tennessee Titan in the future?
I'll start with the last
three for
one.
you.
No,
Okay.
T. Higgins is not a Tennessee Titan. T. Higgins is going to be a franchise tag Cincinnati Bengal.
There you go.
And so that's what's going to happen there. Maybe next year. If we'll see where it goes from there. But personnel decisions, I would think so. One thing that Cincinnati is very different than most places, and they've had a lot of success with, because they have the smallest scouting staff in the league, and the coaches are very involved in that process already, and they have a very prominent voice. They're not the final, obviously, decision in the room, but it's a very prominent voice, and they're in on all of that stuff to work together, because the synergy you need between, okay, here, you can't just take a player, say, this guy's good, you make him work. It's got to be everybody kind of on the same board of understanding what type of guy works, what type of guy I'm looking for, and learning to put those two together, work together, and pinpointing who those guys are, and sort of build everybody rowing the same way. I feel like the success that happened here with that, that he would want to have that kind of be the feel of the organization. But again, we've never seen him in that chair for sure. He's seen it done different ways, but I would think that you would want some kind of a say in personnel matters, not final decision, but certainly you assume pretty significant. And Will Levis, I don't think so, that this means anything that, he was going to save himself for, some great quarterback. I think you go somewhere and I think you can, maybe he believes in Will Levis and can see how he can get Will Levis there. But inevitably you're taking a job because you believe you can do it, and you don't know when another one's going to come by. And if you like everything else about the place, you can find a quarterback if Will Levis doesn't work out, or maybe you just see Will Levis and say, this is a guy, I'm going to make it work. I don't think it means anything either way in regards to the quarterback, other than he clearly sees this as a possibility to develop him for now.
Paul, last thing for you here. As you look at Brian Callahan and his role in Cincinnati, kind of take us behind the curtain a little bit. A lot of Titans fans, that we've heard from today really like the hire. The one, I guess, drawback they have or hang-up they have is he wasn't the one calling play. So kind of explain to us what that process was like in Cincinnati and how involved Brian Callahan was in the offensive operation on game day.
Well, you can never say you're in an NFL town if the play caller hasn't been threatened to be fired midway through game one of any season, right?
That is true.
Exactly. I always laugh. The Bengals have been quite literally coming off the Super Bowl or the AFC Championship game, and in the first 3 weeks, you'll see a few people being like, they got to fire everybody. And it's like, I feel like there has to be a time where we're not allowed to do that. So there's been a lot of conversation about how plays are called, Zach Taylor calling the plays and how that works. And so we've gotten a pretty in-depth look, an explanation about the process. And it's a very, yes, Zach Taylor's the play caller, but it's very collaborative in that, they sort of build what they want to focus on and what it looks like and are constantly sort of talking before each series, in between series, and lining up plays and let's make sure we get to that and let's play this and get to and it's sort of set together even on the fly and in the build during the week, and then also as they go with different people with a different emphasis on early downs or run game stuff or third downs, and so the conversations are sort of flowing. So yes, Zach Taylor has the sheet. He's saying it into the microphone. That's all part of it. And Brian Callahan has called plays in preseason games and things like that too, to switch up the way it goes. But it's been sort of told to us as very much more of a collaborative effort, much more than you would think. And Zach kind of said it's far more than in any place he's ever been in this league, more of a collaborative effort. And they've really liked it that way because they feel like they have a staff of really good communicators. And so that's sort of the background of how that operated here, where sure, one guy has the sheet, but it has kind of been more about them working together on it over the course of the week and then in between series, during series even.
Well, Paul, thanks so much for taking time to be with us today. It's been great to get your perspective on this. Appreciate you helping us out, and we'll talk to you down the road.
Absolutely. Good luck.
Absolutely. Paul Dehner from The Athletic, our guest on Robby and Rexrode. We'll take your reaction to the hiring of Brian Callahan, your reaction to what Paul Dehner had to say there, kind of peeling back the curtain of the way things went in Cincinnati. All that coming up next. You're listening to Robby and Rexrode, 102.5, 106.3 The Game.
Folks, you've been watching NFL playoffs from the sidelines. There's still time to get in the game with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. New customers bet this Sunday's conference championship games with $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. FanDuel has so many wins for you to pick up W. I got a W for you. I'm done trying to figure out what the Lions are going to do in these playoffs, but I think the Chiefs have figured it out, folks. Go with the Chiefs in Baltimore this Sunday. That's my tip for you. Get started with $150 bonus bets guaranteed when you place that first $5 bet. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com/Joe102 to join today. Again, FanDuel.com/Joe102. Make every moment worth FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. You must be 21 years old or older, present in Tennessee. First online real money wager, only $10 first deposit required. Bonus issue is now available. Bonus bets expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem, call the Tennessee Red Line at 800-889-9789.
Welcome back in. Robby and Rexrode, 102.5, 106.3 The Game. Robby Stanley, Joe Rexrode, Nick Keyser here with you on this Tuesday morning, reacting to the hiring of Brian Callahan as the new head coach of the Tennessee Titans. Taking your thoughts on that, 615-737-1025, our phone number. Robby and Rexrode brought to you by Chuck McDowell and Medical House Calls. Middle Tennessee's best medical care in the comfort and safety of your own home. For more information, go to medicalhousecalls.com. Medical House Calls, where the nearest clinic is your home. Appreciate Paul Daner for being with us in the last segment. Joe, what did you make of what Paul had to say about the kind of the dynamic of the play calling? I did notice the collaboration buzzword used about 3 or 4 times there,
baby.
which, woo! Be glad we're not talking about that anymore. But what did you make of the way that process went down in Cincinnati and what that could mean for the Titans here with Brian Callahan as their head coach?
Yeah, it was a really interesting and insightful interview. Would have been perfect if I didn't screw up my mic. So I've had a mic issue and also my brain issue today. But I thought a lot of interesting stuff in that. The play calling stuff we talked about earlier in the show, a Zach Taylor quote that was in Paul's piece today about, basically dismissing this the play calling thing as important as some people make it. I'm with you. I still think ultimately someone has to make a quick decision in the moment, in the flow of the game. Even if they're having the discussions, one person is doing that. So it's still a situation where you find out about how he does and by all indications here, that's his plan, is to do that and to do it exactly the same way as Zach Taylor does it in Cincinnati, and how all these guys have kind of done it. They call the plays as head coaches. Their OCs leave, get jobs, haven't been calling plays, but then they call the plays as head coaches. It's worked out pretty well for the most part. Another thing that I thought was really interesting about that interview is the non-offensive whiz QB stuff with Brian Callahan in terms of the head coach aspects of it.
Yeah.
Look at the playoffs right now. Dan Campbell is not the egghead Mike McDaniel model. He's the leader of men, beat his chest and throw stuff against the locker, just like the Mike Vrabel, Mike Tomlin, John Harbaugh model. John Harbaugh, same thing, right?
Did you just call Mike McDaniel an egghead?
Well, yeah. I mean, he's a nerdy coach. He's a very likable guy.
He is.
I
just want to double check.
I mean, he's a guy. Tua, I need you to. It's just like it's not your
the Pythagorean theorem. Throw the ball this way.
Right. It's not your central casting ball coach like Dan Campbell. Well, I look at Harbaugh and Dan Campbell as more the CEO who they let their coordinators do the job and they lead the team, and it's worked out pretty well. Now John Harbaugh, there's an example, by the way. We're going to see about Dan Campbell, but there's an example of a guy who has had to hire so many coordinators. And he's just done a great job over and over and over again. So, but that is a question I think always with these guys is that aspect of it. And I thought that was an interesting answer about Brian Callahan in terms of beyond just the schematics and the quarterback whispering and all that stuff. There is more to the job. And that other stuff does matter. It is important. It's why I didn't completely dismiss a Mike McDonald, an Aaron Glenn in this process, because sometimes you just get blown away by someone. That was obviously when they hired Vrabel 6 years ago. That was, as much as it was about who were you hiring to develop Mariota, it was still also about that stuff. And it did matter. And it did help him win a lot of football games.
Paul Dehner pretty emphatic that T. Higgins
he didn't say maybe or hedge it all. That was a pretty straight up answer, wasn't it?
It was very emphatic.
It made me think that maybe, someone like Zach Taylor has said without saying it at a press conference, he's not leaving. He's tagged. Now, there's the tag, and then yes, like Paul said, maybe he moves on. There's still the tag trade thing, which you never know how things will go, but it makes sense for them to tag him. It makes sense. Now, I think a Boyd, your consolation possible receiver who gets out of there. Boyd's a free agent too, right?
Yeah.
Well, he's good. What about him?
Well, he is. He's not T. Higgins, but he's
not
good.
T. Higgins, but he's good.
He's good. I mean, look, I think it's an exciting day for Titans fans who are excited about what this could mean for the offense and, quote unquote, modernizing the offense, even though we can get back down the rabbit hole of the offenses that the Titans have run under Mike Vrabel. But, if you're Will Levis today, if you're, Tajay Spears today, I think you're excited about what this could mean, right? I mean, there is demonstrated success of places that Brian Callahan has been offensively. And Paul Dehner did a good job of explaining, like, the quarterbacks that he's been around. We went through the coaching tree earlier of coaches that he's been around. There's a lot to like on the surface about this hire. I'll say the same thing that we talk about anytime we start talking about some of these coaches. How is he going to handle the role of being the CEO, of being the guy that's in charge, of being the head coach in all operations of a football team? How's he going to handle that? I have no idea, right? I mean, everything looks good on paper, but we've seen a lot of coaching hires in the history of the National Football League that look really good on paper that don't work out. So we're going to find out what kind of a coach Brian Callahan is. We talked about final say stuff earlier. I would be interested to know what Brian Callahan's thoughts were on that. And when, now that they've hired their head coach, when are we going to hear from a Rand Carthon or an Amy Adams Strunk about what that structure is going to look like moving forward? I would have to think we'll hear from Brian Callahan at some point here in the next couple of days, and I would hope not long after that ownership speaks on the matter.
Yeah, I would assume that when they have the intro presser for Brian Callahan today or tomorrow would be my assumption. Amy Adams Strunk, I think, will be there. We'll probably, if it's like when they had hired Carthon, she'll introduce him, say a few words, and not take questions. But I hope in those words she does say, what it is because she said she would. And I guess if she needs to go do a video with Mike Keith to say it, that's fine too. But don't say you're going to do something and not. I think we're almost. I mean, it's getting to the point where we're a little obsessed with that, right? Because the thing is, like Liam McLeod's like, can we start bleeping collaborative
Yes.
when it slips out? I agree. That word is we need to change the word. But someone also asked, does this mean Vrabel wasn't collaborative? No, there's no GM in this league, I would hope, who's like, hey, Coach Johnny, shut up. Here's your left guard. Here's your receiver. Get out there and coach him up. Get your butt on that field with your whistle. I don't want to hear you. I'm in my nice office sipping coffee. I mean, it's all collaborative. It's you want to know, who has the final say. I get it, but it's almost like collaborative's old, but it's also I'm getting sick of that too. I hope she just says it. I don't really care which side it is because they have to work together. They do.
Are you hoping that's the final say of who has final say, as they say?
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, clip that up. Yes.
Thank you.
Brilliant. You're welcome. Nice job. Thank you.
More on the hiring of Brian Callahan coming up next. Not my proudest moment. 615-737-1025 is our phone number. More of your reaction to get to on our phone and text lines. We'll do that. This is Robby and Rexrode, 102.5, 106.3 The Game. 102.5, 106.3 The Game, officially inviting you to our first ever Super Saturday. Join us come hungry Saturday, February the 10th at New Heights Brewing for all the soup you can handle from some of the finest restaurants in Middle Tennessee. Bring the family, enjoy delicious soup, live music, games for the kids, and more. It's our first ever Super Saturday benefiting the Nashville Predators Foundation. More details coming, including how to purchase tickets, so make sure you're tuned in for that. Robby Stanley, Joe Rexrode, Nick Keyser here with you on this Tuesday morning, discussing the hiring of Brian Callahan, the next head coach of the Tennessee Titans, former Cincinnati Bengals offensive coordinator. So, Joe, we went through kind of his list of accomplishments earlier. He's been in Cincinnati as the OC since 2019. Obviously, the quarterbacks that he's dealt with, even dating back to 2010, where he started at the age of, I believe, 26 with the Denver Broncos, working with Peyton Manning in that capacity. You know, you heard Paul Dehner a few minutes ago talk about their relationship with Peyton Manning. He's worked with Matthew Stafford. He's worked with Derek Carr, obviously with Joe Burrow in Cincinnati. And as far as coaches are concerned, Jim Caldwell, John Fox, John Gruden, Gary Kubiak, Zach Taylor, obviously, Josh McDaniels. It's an extensive list of people that Brian Callahan has been associated with. And then, Joe, there's the obvious part of this with his father, Bill Callahan, who was the head coach of the Raiders back in the day when they played in the Super Bowl against John Gruden and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Titans fans of a certain age will remember that one well, losing to the Raiders in the AFC title game that season. But now the question of, as Brian Callahan starts to assemble his staff here, number one, how well will those connections serve him in building a staff? And number two, will his father, Bill Callahan, be included in that? He's the offensive line coach in Cleveland. Will Cleveland allow him to come join a staff with his son, even though he is under contract right now? And you believe that will be the case at the end of the day?
I think so. And, he could be assistant head coach, run game czar, or these titles in this league. I can't believe that. I definitely can't believe Kevin Stefanski, but maybe even Jimmy Haslam would deny Bill Callahan working with his kid. We'll see. We'll see how it works out. I think that's going to get worked out. I think he'll be the offensive line coach. OC is really interesting. Thomas Brown, I think I would make him my favorite to be the OC. That is not, but Liam Cohen wouldn't be either. In both cases, those are McVay guys. Cohen with a specific link to Will Levis, of course, as his OC at Kentucky in 21, who would come in with the offense Levis had. It's the same offense. It's the offense, and I think both would make sense. But I'm not, until I know something for certain. It's possible Brian Callahan has somebody else in mind, so we'll see on that. But remember the Titans trading Mike Vrabel stuff, all that talk, and, of course, then we find out after he's fired that the Patriots had Gerard Mayo signed up all along. Yeah. So there really was no obvious trade partner anyway. So the Titans didn't trade him. They fired him. They got going into this process. Again, if they had, let's say they were going to try to go that route, they'd still be sitting around right now. They'd be waiting for the trade partner to get to this point, maybe at this right now. So they did get into it. They are the first outside hire a team has made in this cycle, and it's a race. This whole thing is a race for assistant coaches too. So Brian Callahan can get cracking on putting his staff together, while the Commanders and Seahawks and Panthers and other teams that are open right now, Falcons, Chargers, all wait to make their hire. And then there are some coaches I would bet that would be of interest to several of these new head coaches. Well, Brian Callahan has a head start.
He does, and we've spent so much time focusing on the offensive side of things. I do wonder, like, defensively, who's the D coordinator going to be? How equipped is Brian Callahan to put together a good defensive staff on that side of things too? And, I know obviously our focus is on Will Levis and the offense and trying to get that right and who's going to be calling plays. And it looks like Brian Callahan's going to be calling plays. Again, Buck Rising of A to Z Sports put that out there earlier today. So what about the defensive side of things? Like, this is his first time as a head coach building a staff, and can you put together a staff defensively that gets the Titans back to maximizing what they can be? Which, by the way, I mean, the offensive line was so bad this past season, and you had a new quarterback stepping in Will Levis, that all we talked about for the most part was the offense. I do think it's fair to say the defense underperformed a little bit based on expectations heading into the year. So can Brian Callahan build a staff where you can put together a good defensive staff on that side of the ball too? That's going to be important to identify if you're him kind of in the early going of things here.
Yeah. And how does he look at, the DC hire? Is it just straight up find the best DC you can and say, okay, construct your defense? Or does he have, like, Lou Anarumo is a heck of a DC with the Bengals. Technically, it's a 4-3. There's a lot.
Maybe it's coming back.
Maybe, but it's I guess some people call it a 4-2-5, but it's a little more like 4 down. But a lot of teams. I feel like there's just so much copycatting in this league. So I'd be surprised, I guess, if Callahan was like tied to like, we must do this scheme or that scheme. I would think that he would basically just try to find the best defense coordinator he can, and then that person is the CEO of the defense. I think that's, and again, like, when you do that, which I think makes the most sense, but when you do that, you do have it's not the same degree of problem, but you can potentially have that problem on the other side of the ball of then, you have to try to go find new coordinators if you're going to have success. If you're going to win in this league, you're going to have to replace coordinators left and right.
Well, and
John Harbaugh.
If you missed the Paul Dehner interview, go check it out wherever you get your podcast. Search Robby and Rexrode, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. I thought it was a really insightful interview for a lot of different reasons. But I think the main thing that stood out to me, Joe, was the idea of Zach Taylor and the way that he did things with McVay in L.A. coming to Cincinnati, and he talked about the Todd Gurley part of it and the scheme they were running and how it's completely different now, and the ability to adapt and change, sometimes even on the fly, like in the middle of a season, changing up the way that you're either attacking things, the way you're scheming things out. And fairly or unfairly, a big problem that Titans fans seem to have, on our text line certainly, with Mike Vrabel was the stubbornness and the perceived unwillingness to adapt and all those things. And one of the things that stood out to me in the Paul Dehner interview was, Brian Callahan in this process with Zach Taylor. It sounds like they've been very open to changing things up on the fly, changing their schemes. If something's not working, taking a look at it and trying to adjust. And I think that's encouraging if you're a Titans fan.
I agree. That's absolutely encouraging. I know that, but this topic is going to drive me crazy. But whatever. Vrabel's gone, but like, people are going to continue to just think that Vrabel had a 1983 offense.
Oh, I know.
I'm going to continue to be annoyed as hell by it. The funny thing is the Titans actually now. Paul talked about 180 degree, like he said, it's wide zone. That is what the Mike Shanahan offense is, and how all those average backs in Denver had 1,500-yard seasons and all that stuff, right? So they switched it up to a lot more, like he said, shotgun gap scheme. But guess what? The Titans also were doing that the last couple of years. Last year they actually changed a ton from straight up all zone all the time. It just didn't look as good because you couldn't block. Let's talk about offensive line coaches real quick. I think I was going to make this point earlier in my brain. I had a shortage on me. I've had a few of those today. I've known Jeff Stoutland for about 25 years, offensive line coach for the Eagles, one of the best offensive line coaches in
NFL history.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
That dude got a first-round pick, okay, was able to coach him up, have him for several years, and he sat him down and then said, please go to Nashville.
Yeah.
There's limitations, man. If players can't play, they can't freaking play. If you can't block, you're going to look like an idiot or like you're mundane or you're archaic on offense. So you got to have players.
615-737-1025. More of your thoughts, your final thoughts for the day on our program on the Brian Callahan hiring by the Tennessee Titans. By the way, Gary Kubiak will be joining Chase and Big Joe's show at 9:30 today. So
that's a great get.
Make sure you tune in for that. It'll be a very interesting perspective from Gary Kubiak. We'll have more on the hiring of Brian Callahan coming up next. Robby and Rexrode, 102.5, 106.3, The Game. Welcome back in. Robby and Rexrode, 102.5, 106.3 The Game. Robby Stanley, Joe Rexrode, Nick Keyser here with you on this Tuesday morning. Taking your thoughts on the hiring of Brian Callahan, 615-737-1037. 1025. Joe, to sum things up today, I think it was pretty clear when you look back at the way this all went down that the Titans identified Brian Callahan pretty early in the process, and that was their guy. That's who they targeted. That's who they wanted. And we talked with Jared last week about it. We talked about it yesterday on the show with the David Shaw interview taking place. And then after our show went off the air yesterday, you had Thomas Brown reportedly coming in for a second interview, Dan Quinn reportedly coming in for a second interview. So it felt a little weird yesterday afternoon, but Tom Pelissero and Adam Schefter and others put it out there last night that the plan for the Titans was to not let Brian Callahan leave the building. And when they identified him as early as they did, and we knew last week that he was coming in for a second interview, we talked about him being the favorite for the job at that point. And when you piece all the things together, Joe, it just feels like Brian Callahan was their guy from the start, and they got their guy.
Yeah, look, I think they had Dan Quinn's schedule, but you still continue to schedule interviews until you get a confirmation.
For
right?
sure, yeah.
I mean, you still have to be prepared for someone to say no to you. I think if based on all we knew, and of course there's more known, especially with Paul Dehner's piece of The Athletic last night about all how it all went down. It was very clear. They were after Callahan from the start. The word, I know, TD, give TD credit for saying Callahan real early. Jared, a lot of people, looked at the tea leaves and it was pretty clear. And so had he eventually moved on and they hired somebody else, I think it would have been pretty clear. Like, he didn't like the job. It was pretty clear that they identified him quickly. So it seems to me like they got their top choice, and they got him quickly. And so that's a big deal. And hey, you know what? I'm sure Amy Adams Strunk takes some pleasure in the fact that they got him, and Mike Vrabel hasn't been hired by anybody yet. So I know some Titans fans are also enjoying that as well. But now he has a chance to build his staff. And by the way, I do not expect a presser today.
Okay.
So I would guess that it would be tomorrow. But look, it's from all the information you have, nothing's ever guaranteed. Nothing's even close to it in this league. I think it's a good hire. I like the hire. And you're trying to find someone. I know usually when these happen, like someone gets hired in the NFL or whatever, some coaching job, it's not easy to find people to say, oh, man, terrible hire. Yeah, I really don't like that guy, right? But I mean, I've reached out to a lot of different people, and we just heard from Paul, who knows him very well. I mean, it's very positive reviews on him beyond just the X's and O's and stuff like that. So I think that should be exciting too. I mean, look, Rand Carthon led the search. Obviously, Amy Adams Strunk, heavy hand in this. She owns the football team. I'm sure that he did well in the interview. And I also assume – now, Paul kind of poo-pooed the Levis aspect of this.
He did.
Which I thought was interesting. But I don't think you take this job. Yes, there are only so many jobs, and that's true. But I don't think you take this job if you don't believe in him at all, right? I don't think so.
Well, I agree with you. Now, I don't think you necessarily turn down the job if you're not 100% committed to him either, right? Like I think there's some
fair
level of belief. Otherwise, you're probably not taking it. That doesn't mean, in my opinion, that Brian Callahan looks at Will Levis and says, yep, that guy's the next Joe Burrow. Like, I think there's a middle ground there. But for sure, like if he thought that Will Levis was like some bum out there and you couldn't win with, then you're not setting yourself up for success as a head coach at that point if you take the job.
Exactly. So I think that, and whatever he feels, whatever percentage certainty he has that Will Levis can be a great quarterback in the league, he's got to be 100% all in, obviously, on trying to make it happen. So how does that work? What's the OC situation? I think Thomas Brown, I think I called the shot yesterday. Did I call the shot yesterday? Did I call the shot that Callahan's the head coach and Thomas Brown's the OC? All right. Well, there you go.
Did you know yesterday and you just didn't report it on our program?
I did not. But we can go with that. A couple of years from now, we can just go back and say I reported on the show, But I'll stick with that. I'll stick with Thomas Brown as OC. Could there be, someone else he has in mind? Potentially. Liam Cohen is the other obvious choice, a guy who coached Levis in college. But I think that would be a good combination. And of course, a McVay guy coming in here to be OC, a guy who, didn't have success in Carolina, but who did this year?
As many people have pointed out, and I put myself in this category, Joe, I'm just glad they didn't hire somebody with the name of Mike. They've gone down the road of Mike a lot with their head coaches, and it's good to see him change it up a little bit.
It is, finally. And also someone on the text line is like, hey, since Peyton loves Callahan, how about him joining the coaching staff? And I'm like, I'm sure Peyton would love grinding some film at 3 a.m. as an NFL assistant right now,
Not the first
Tennessee
Tennessee job that's been linked to Peyton Manning around here. Get back to the glory days.
That's
going to do it for us today here on Robby and Rexrode. Chasing Big Joe coming up next. Gary Kubiak joining the show at 9:30. Make sure you tune in for that. You're listening to 102.5, 106.3 The Game.